1970-something, 1980-something, and that hardware is usable, so shut up. And another thing that's interesting is they never cross-compile. A lot of people who support multiple hardware platforms they actually build the code on a 24-core AMD 64 machine and install it on the VAX. No. Their releases are their VAX release is built on a VAX, because this is a validation that the code actually works, that the operating system is self-hosting.
Zorus? Previous slide, the Sharp Zorus?
Zorus, yes. Tiny little device. For a long time it was the only way to get handheld SSH. You could, it had a thumb-based keyboard.
Right, I had two.
Oh, you have two. You can run OpenBSD on it, and people use them today. So, you can customize OpenBSD. They have thousands of add-on software packages. Most of it is compiled with the most common options. You want to set up an Apache PHP server, yeah, fine. If you want something kind of exotic, you want Emacs built with the Athena toolkit. They make it very easy to build it yourself, but they're not going to bother to build it. One of the nice things about OpenBSD is the PF packet filter. How many of you have used IP tables? I have used IP tables. I've used it a great deal, and therefore I feel quite confident in saying that I really hate it. This is a configuration file for PF. Don't allow anything in. Pass in on our network interface from anything on the local network. Pass in from anywhere else on these 3 ports, and send anything out. You can look at this and even not knowing much about PF, you can have a pretty good idea what this rule set does.
I would have expected the block to be on the bottom.
It is last match. And that is
does the packet filter also do things like masquerading and translating?
Oh yes. Yes, you have masquerading. It does bandwidth control. Everything you need to build a very solid network mingling device. You can also do much more complex things. Define a table of the hosts that you want to treat specially. Set up macros for various things in your rule set. So you don't want to, if your external interface is VR0, you don't want to change your network card and have to go do a search and replace on your firewall rule set, because something's going to go wrong. Especially if your interfaces are named something like 80:something. Search and replace goes very wrong very quickly. So you can define which interfaces you want to treat in which way. You can define which addresses, which ports. So instead of having a bunch of rules that say from each of these addresses, you can see our second line there that just says pass in from our management hosts. You get a new subnet that has something important on it. You add it to one list of addresses, and it percolates through the entire rules. The equivalent in IP tables is a little longer and, at least in my opinion, harder to read. This resembles English. So, you can alter those tables at the command line. You can add dynamic rules at a command line if you want. The trick is you define a place in the rules that says, here is an anchor, a named label, where you may add rules. So instead of just running a command line and tacking it wherever you want, the filter says, no, you may add rules here and here. And this retains your strict processing of your firewall rules. So, some other things. All the hardware sensors, all of that IPMI related stuff works, spills its guts out for you. Tmux lets you run multiple windows in one window. It's much like Screen, except, how many of you have used Screen? Well, Screen includes features like a serial line client, which I'm sure there was a perfectly good reason for it, but these kinds of features make Screen much larger and much more complicated. Tmux is just a terminal multiplexer. The CWM window manager I think is wonderful. The swap. How many of you have run into the encrypted swap problem? If you encrypt your entire swap space so that nobody can read it, but you use one key for the entire space, anything written to swap can stay there for years. Depending on how your program is written, this may include your passwords. So OpenBSD doesn't have one giant swap space that it encrypts. It has one swap space with a whole bunch of tiny encrypted swaps, each with its own key. And when it's done with a piece of swap, it throws away the key for that piece. All kinds of fun routing stuff. And of course, clothing. You may have seen a lot of OpenBSD clothing around conferences and such, and there's actually a pretty good reason for that. OpenBSD has no corporate backer. All of their development is funded entirely by sale of CD sets, t-shirts, related stuff. You can buy 2 of my books through the OpenBSD project, and the proceeds go to them. And of course, they take donations. They will happily take your money. So, it is 7:45. I have till what? 8-ish is okay? Okay. I'm going to try to go through this. This is the current OpenBSD memory randomization project. The 2038 issue. How many of you hope to be retired by 2038? Okay, this has a huge impact on you. Because of system lifespans. The electrical controls in Detroit are 40 years old, which is sadly not that uncommon. Toronto is not far from here, and their Can-Do nuclear plant, lovely name. It's run by was run by a PDP-11 for many years. It finally died. They replaced it with a modern PC running a PDP-11 emulator. This is what, 200 miles from here?
The wind fortunately goes.
Yeah, fortunately the wind usually blows that way. But we have nuclear reactors west of here. What about medical devices? Wind River sells Linux for medical devices. I would not be shocked to discover in the year 2038 that I had a pacemaker. And I do not want it to have 32-bit time, thank you. What, am I going to get a call in, late December 2037 saying, we need you to come in for an operation now. No?
You're on a waiting list.
You're on a waiting list, but just come to the waiting room and, first come, first serve to have your BIOS flash. At that point, I would just about have a heart attack, except of course I couldn't. So, there are solutions. They've invented a times 64T, but nobody uses it. And adding this new API won't fix all the old code. It's the same. Microsoft never stopped supporting old APIs. Linux has the overwhelming majority of old APIs. I know they've pulled a few, but for the most part, old code actually works. And there are other things. There are games you can play with signed versus unsigned. That all gets really ugly really fast, and lots of stuff will break. And if you're going to break it anyway, let's break it properly. We could say, okay, the world will be on 64-bit hardware by then. And the answer is no. Embedded manufacturers are not going to switch to 64-bit hardware until 32-bit is no longer made. The power requirements are much higher. System requirements much higher, much more heat. And 32-bit hardware will continue to be made until embedded manufacturers stop buying it. Okay. We could say, yes, there is a forward migration path. Anyone remember the Large Files Summit? They wanted, back in '92, all the Unix guys got together and said, we need to support files larger than 2 gigabytes. Here's our forward migration path. And this will support files up to 128 gigs. And eventually people will stop everybody will have migrated forward, and you will no longer need to define -D large file source. Compile some software sometime. Look at what scrolls past. And you will, to this day, see a majority of software saying, define this flag. That forward migration isn't. If you have a bright idea on solving the 2038 issue, try it, document it, present it at a conference. Save us all, please. OpenBSD is redefining time t as long, long. This will end this problem. It will no longer be an issue during the life of our universe. Anyone who wants to port OpenBSD into the next universe, I suggest you reset the epoch and don't worry about backwards compatibility. So, they've done this on all the platforms. Stuff is breaking. It's kind of cool. Bug reports are being filed because in theory, the software should just take it and compile, and we all know that it doesn't. People are reporting bugs, but OpenBSD will ship with long, long time t. And they are using their position as a pressure point to drag everybody else forward with them. People have tried things like this before. FreeBSD and Linux have long time t on 64-bit hardware. NetBSD went to long, long time t everywhere, but they didn't do any work on engaging the outside world that things are crashing. And sadly, that's the the NetBSD folks are not that involved in the outside
So
world.
what's the difference between long time and long time?
It varies by platform.
Long does also, or?
I believe so. There are probably people here capable of giving a much better answer than I
But
can.
on 32-bit CPU, long would be 64-bit?
Yes,
Typically,
128-bit in places?
in places.
there's, like a U64, there's several different types of other defines I have to deal with embedded because I have to port between 60 and 32-bit, whatever.
Sure.
Short, long, whatever, is different everywhere. As bad as when the Linux had to go to the alpha where the pointers were 64 bits and the integers were not. But the idea is there's usually a portability library, and everybody does it a little bit differently, but if you need a bit size, there's a particular include, I don't remember what it is, but I think it defines like U32, U64, U16 or whatever, and then that type defs it to either long, short, or unsigned car as whatever. Cars are not necessarily 8 bits either, but that's another thing. But there's when I say long or long time T, well, time T is the type def thing that should be 64 bits. Time T will now be, in 5.5 will now be type def to a unsigned 64-bit integer by whatever include magic for the architecture that you don't want to see. So it's not whether it's long or whatever. The time T's type def was 32-bit, unsigned 32-bit. Now it's going to be unsigned 64-bit.
Thank you. Yeah, I knew I didn't have to prepare that. Someone would fill in for me.
So,
Yes, sir.
will that compile on Azorus?
Yes, yes, it will. It will compile everywhere. And
Will it run fast?
it will actually, I can guarantee you that the VAX users will be checking. So, by doing this, OpenBSD is, yes, they're leaning on third parties, but they're also saying, hey, here's our code. Here are all kinds of ways to fix this in your code. And it will drag the world forward whether it likes it or not. Yes, sir.
So it seems like, well, okay, you guys will OpenBSD may never be the world's most popular open source
Yep.
operating system, but it seems like one real value would have is that if I'm a software vendor and I can say, my software compiles and runs on OpenBSD, then no matter what platform you do run on, there are whole classes of programs that we can kind of promise you will not have.
Yes.
And that could be very valuable to a lot.
Yes. If you run on OpenBSD and you run correctly, that is an acid test to say, we do not have these classes of problems.
How many BSDs are there? You mentioned
Yes.
open, free, and,
Okay, the big BSDs, I'm going to answer that in just a second because this is the last slide.
okay.
OpenBSD.org, go there, try it out. I have books there here, you can buy some of them. There, the gas is now tax deductible. How many BSDs are there? How much time have we got? 7:55, okay. There are 4 major BSDs. FreeBSD, OpenBSD, NetBSD, and then Dragonfly, which is a FreeBSD is focused on the most popular hardware, OpenBSD, and all the stuff I just babbled about. NetBSD's main goal is portability. Dragonfly, it has some radical reimaginings of the operating system, and their end goal is to run as a single system image across multiple pieces of commodity hardware.
Say that again?
No, it is not ready yet. However, their multiprocessor support now runs completely lockless, which is a major stepping stone towards that. I don't know if they'll succeed, but it's really kind of cool to watch, and I'm glad someone's being really ambitious.
What would be the advantage of that?
You have a room full of 100 PCs, and they have one operating system instance. They're all running, all of the cores on all of those machines are coordinated as one operating system.
Isn't it kind of what Google does?
It's like what Google does, except they use an array of Linux systems, and their software is written to cooperate between OSs. The Dragonfly goal is you SSH into one machine, and you're actually administering all of them because the same OS instance is running on all of the nodes. You call a pointer in your code, it might be on that node, or on that node, or on that node. One memory space.
Who could have known?
Do all you BSD guys get along? Do you play together well?
Yes and no. It's like football. If you get a bunch of football fans in the same room, you know, someone says, well, I'm a Packers fan and the Packers are awesome. And someone else will say,
I'm gonna
oh,
take you
no.
out back.
Sorry?
So I'm gonna take you out back?
Perhaps. And someone will say, no, Steelers all the way. And someone holds up a hand and says, Detroit Lions. And everybody goes, ha ha ha. But among the people who are really in the communities, yeah, they get along. I mean, at least we're not golf.
Hockey.
Oh, hey, don't go dissing hockey.
Quite the opposite. Oh, but speaking of which, OS 10, Darwin.
Oh, yes. OS 10 is, the user land is BSD based.
Yeah, what is the relative size of these? Is one 90% and the other smaller?
FreeBSD has the largest user base because they actually try to recruit people. They do things like promotion. OpenBSD is second. There is a certain charm in moral absolutes. Say, no, we will stick two fingers in Cisco's eyes because it is the right thing to do. And that's, they're kind of like, OpenBSD is like the Richard Stallman of the BSD world. This is how you do it.
This is the right way.
This is the right way, and if you don't like it, go play with Windows or something. But you get them, you go to a conference with a heavy BSD contingent, go to the nearest bar with a decent selection, and you will find them there buying each other drinks and debating the fine points of this or that type of architecture.
And how much commonality is there in the code?
We steal from each other blatantly and liberally. Code may originate in one project, migrate to another, be improved in a third, and stolen back to the original. Where it's all under the same license. We really have no, I don't want to say pride of ownership. There's, if someone has a good idea, we'll take it.
Why choose one over the other then?
What are your goals?
Security.
If you're looking for what OpenBSD offers, I use FreeBSD and OpenBSD. Each has a separate place, and to be honest, each has its own annoying peculiarities. Now, OpenBSD I'll use mostly for packet filter, routing. I'll also use it for a highly secure system like my Ansible system runs OpenBSD. Because that is a key point for systems administration. Ansible is like Puppet or Chef. I don't want anyone getting into that. It's OpenBSD. If I want to run a whole bunch of Apache modules and such, and just make it pretty easy, I'll use FreeBSD.
Yeah, what about the Linux the utilities? That would be things like move and copy. They're not GNU Linux.
No, they're not.
And is it possible to get the GNU utilities?
Oh, yes. There is a core utils port. And there is even a script that will do a bunch of aliases for you and say, here, put this in your .cshrc or .shrc. The thing I find most annoying switching from one to the other are the flags to PS. Because back when POSIX was first defined, a lot of us were saying, hallelujah. Someone will finally have to sit down and say, is it PS minus AX or PS minus EAF? I don't care which, just pick one. And the standard came out and said, you may use either. And to which various of us got out our torches and our pitchforks, but it was too late. But yes, you can certainly get the core GNU utils.
You said you use Emacs.
Yeah, I use Emacs.
Emacs are good things.
Yeah.
Does that come with the operating system, or you build
That
it?
is an add-on package. I do package add Emacs. Actually, it's usually package add Emacs no X. Because I don't want the X. And that's a very common config, so they support it.
One point you said this is Unix-like. So what's the difference here between Unix and Unix-like? Because I would have thought that this is actually Unix.
And there's actually a very easy answer. The word Unix is a trademark of the Open Group. To call your operating system Unix, you must submit to their compatibility tests and fork out large amounts of money. Which means that any operating system that lets you build it from scratch and you can tweak whatever you want is going to have a hard time qualifying for that. And also, you'd have to do it for every single release, every single point release, every security update. And nobody bothers. Nobody cares anymore. Sun cared. They paid the money. They are real Unix. And do you remember the AT&T lawsuits? It all ties back to that. So, as an author, I have learned to be very careful. It's Unix-like. However,
What did BSD stand for originally?
Berkeley Software Distribution. Back in the day,
Bill Joy and,
yes, back in the day, AT&T let universities use Unix for a small fee to cover the cost of the tape to deliver it. And it was missing a lot of features, and computer science teachers have these students who need projects. So they would assign projects to their class like the S51K file system sucks diseased moose wang. Write a better file system. And the students would write this code, and They would submit it, the University of California, Berkeley acted as a clearinghouse for all these contributions. And they eventually found out that they had rewritten the entirety of AT&T Unix except for a small handful of files. So one day Bill Joyce sat down and rewrote those files, and here we are. So nobody was actually using AT&T Unix for several years. They were all running AT&T plus BSD patch set. Any other questions? I think I'm trampling into, I'm really trampling into my next speaker's time. I'm very sorry, sir. I guess I'm going to dinner if you have questions, but.
Yes, yes.
Oh.